Hey everyone, welcome in or welcome back. Get comfy and get relaxed. Since Halloween is on the horizon and I love bringing up how dark Pokemon and other games lore is, I thought today we could look at another side of the dark side of Pokemon, in this case being the fan base of Pokemon creepypasta creators. Now for those of you who weren't obsessed with creepypastas from like the 2010s to 2015, a creepypasta is a horror related legend based around either video games, cryptids, ghosts, murder, suicide, zombies, aliens, a bunch of different stuff, haunted televisions, stuff along the lines of Candle Cove and the Russian sleep experiment. And funnily enough, there are a lot of creepypastas that are based on the Pokemon games themselves. So with that idea in mind, I thought we could sit down and read out 5 Pokepastas that I used to love. I want to see how dark are they, or how out of date are they. Now, of course, it goes without saying that there are trigger warnings, as most of these stories mention suicide, self-harm, psychosis, and mental illness. So, of course, listen at your own will and enjoy. Now for the first creepypasta I'd like to go over is one called Pokemon Creepy Black. Now as with a lot of these creepypasta stories, the author is really unknown, as most creepypastas came from stuff like 4chan and different anonymous posting sites. This creepypasta came out before Pokemon Black had officially released, so originally it was known as Pokemon Black, but changed to Pokemon Creepy Black once the version had come out. And with that, we will now begin Pokemon Creepy Black. The story begins with the author claiming that he's a collector of bootleg Pokemon games, Pokemon Diamond and Jade, Chaos Black, etc. He enjoys them, he thinks they're fun even if they're unplayable, which most are. But there's one that he hasn't seen mention of on the internet anywhere that he bought at a flea market about 5 years ago. The author then adds a picture of the cartridge, which I will put in here in case anyone might recognize it. The author then ends his statement with saying that he lost the game 2 years ago when he moved, then going on to explain the game as followed. The game started with a familiar Nidorino and Gengar intro of Red and Blue version. However, press start screen had been altered. Red was there, but the Pokemon did not cycle through. It also said Black version under the Pokemon logo. Upon selecting New Game, the game started the Professor Oak speech, and it quickly became evident that the game was essentially Pokemon Red version. After selecting your starter, if you looked at your Pokemon, you had, in addition to Bulbasaur, Charmander, or Squirtle, another Pokemon, only known as Ghost. Ghost was level 1. It had the sprite of the ghosts that are encountered in Lavender Town before obtaining the Sylph Scope. It had one attack, Curse. I know that there's a real move named Curse, but the attack did not exist in Generation 1, so it appeared that it was hacked in. Defending Pokemon were unable to attack Ghost, it would only say they were too scared to move. When the move Curse was used in battle, the screen would cut to black. The cry of defending Pokemon would be heard, but it was distorted, played at a much lower pitch than normal. The battle screen would then reappear and the defending Pokemon would be gone. If used in a battle against a trainer, when the Pokeballs representing their Pokemon would appear in the corner, they would have one fewer Pokeball. The implication was that the Pokemon died. What's even stranger is that after defeating a trainer and seeing the red receive 200 for winning, the battle commands would appear again. If you selected Run, the battle would end as it normally does. You could also select Curse. If you did, upon returning to the overworld, the trainer's sprite would be gone. After leaving and re-entering the area, the spot where the trainer had been would be replaced with a tombstone, like the ones in Lavender Town. The move Curse was not usable in all instances. It would fail against ghost Pokemon. It also fail if it was used against trainers that you would have to face again, such as your rival or Giovanni. It was usable in your final battle against them, however. After defeating the Elite Four, the game changes quite a bit. After viewing the Hall of Fame, which consisted of Ghost and a couple Pokemon I used for HMs, the screen cut to black. A box appeared with the words "many years later." It then cut to Lavender Town. An old man was standing and looking at the tombstones. You then realized that this man was your character. The man moved at only half of your normal walking speed. You no longer had any Pokemon with you, not even Ghost, who up to this point had been impossible to remove from your party through depositing in the PC. The overworld was entirely empty. There was no people at all. There were still the tombstones of the trainers that you used to curse on, however. You could go pretty much anywhere in the overworld at this point, though your movement was limited by the fact that you had no Pokemon to use HMs. And regardless of where you went, the music of Lavender Town continued on in infinite loop. After wandering for a while, I found that if you go through Diglett's Cave, one of the cuttable bushes that normally blocks the path on the other side is no longer there, allowing you to advance and return to Pallet Town. Upon entering your house and going to the exact tile where you start the game, the screen would cut to black. Then, the sprite of a Caterpie appeared. Then it was replaced by a Weedle, and then a Pidgey. Soon I realized as the Pokemon progressed from Rattata to Blastoise that these were all of the Pokemon that I used Curse on. At the end of my rival's team, a youngster appeared, and that Bugcatcher. These were the trainers I had cursed. Throughout the sequence, the Lavender Town music was playing, but it was slowly decreasing in pitch. By the time your rival appeared on screen, it was little more than a demonic rumble. Another cut to black. A few moments later, the battle screen suddenly appeared. Your trainer sprite was now that of an old man, the same one as the one that teaches you how to catch Pokemon in Viridian City. Ghost appeared on the other side, along with the words, "Ghost wants to fight." You couldn't use items, and you had no Pokemon. If you tried to run, you couldn't escape. The only option was fight. Using fight would immediately cause you to use struggle, which didn't affect Ghost, but did chip off a bit of your own HP. When it was Ghost's turn to attack, it would simply say, ... Eventually, when your HP reached a critical point, Ghost would finally use Curse. The screen cut to black a final time. Regardless of the buttons you pressed, you were permanently stuck in this black screen. At this point, the only thing you could do was turn off the Game Boy. When you played again, New Game was the only option. The game had erased the file. I played through this hack game many times, and every time the game ended with the sequence. Several times I didn't use Ghost at all, though he was impossible to remove from the party. In these cases, it didn't show any Pokemon or trainers. Cut to the climactic battle with Ghost. I'm not sure what the motives were behind the creator of this hack. It wasn't widely distributed, so it was presumably not for monetary gain. It was very well done for a bootleg. It seems he was trying to convey a message, though it seems I am the sole receiver of this message. I'm not entirely sure what it was. The inevitability of death? The pointlessness of it? Perhaps he was simply trying to morbidly inject death and darkness into a children's game. Regardless, this children's game has made me think, and it has made me cry. Now, looking at the story, while it is a little bit dated and there are some clear tropes that obviously were set deep into the creepypasta writing style, I love it. It is so fun. This is one of the creepypastas that was a groundwork idea for the tropes like a cursed game or a character dies and there's suicide and blood inside the game. It's simple. I love it. The use of the sprites, the big use of Lavender Town, which became a super huge trope inside of all of PokePastas. And the reality that even though it sounds like such a horrifying thing, it's still grounded by the fact that the narrator's perspective is completely detached. He just played the game and ended it. That was all that happened. It wasn't super graphic, it wasn't murdery, it wasn't something as cringy as Jeff the Killer. It was simple. It made you think about all the people you had killed, and it made you think about the reality of death. Genuinely, I love this one. It was my first one getting me really into creepypastas, and it's still my favorite to this day. Ooh, with that banger out of the way, we have our next work called Buried Alive. Now, to clarify, it's not actually called Buried Alive, but it gained that title based on the sprite titled Buried Alive. Anyway, the story of Buried Alive goes, the Buried Alive model, often referred to as its code, the Berryman script, was to be found on the final story of the Pokemon Tower, and what has now been replaced with Marowak's Ghost. According to the scripts assigned to it, the Buried Alive model was intended to be the boss of the tower. Once reaching the top floor, the following conversation would have taken place. "You're here. I'm trapped. And I'm lonely. So very lonely. Won't you join me?" After this, the battle would have been initiated. Once in battle view, the Buried Alive model appears to be a decaying human corpse attempting to crawl out of the ground. It has been programmed to have 2 white hands, a Gengar, and a Muck. Strangely enough, a protocol for the Buried Alive's actions after it was defeated were not written. In the case of the player defeating him, the game would freeze. However, a specific ending was written by an unknown programmer upon losing the battle. In this ending, the Buried Alive was to have stated, "Finally, fresh meat," followed by several lines of gibberish. He was to have then dragged the player character into the ground surrounding him. The scene would finish with a typical game over screen. However, in the background, an image of the Buried Alive character devouring the player was to have been shown. Especially strange are the protocols for after the scene. The cartridge was to download this image to the small internal memory contained in the Game Boy, overwriting the title screen that normally accompanied Game Boy turning on. Instead, whenever it was started, the player would view this image as a sound file stagmesh.wav played. And to end off the story, I'm going to add the little clip of stagmesh.wav. I love sprite art, especially Buried Alive's design. I like it so much. While it doesn't look entirely like it would belong in Pokemon, it's close enough to where it still gives that eerie horror, but looks exactly like it could fit. This story was also a big part of the trend that comes up is using all these old Game Boy games such as Strangled Red, Creepy Red, using Pokemon Gold and Silver. I also like that the horror doesn't divulge into how Buried Alive came into existence. It was just, it could be a curse, it could be a programming error, it could be a ghost inhabiting the specific Game Boy. You don't know. And that's enjoyable. I like that a lot with these creepypastas. Man, I'm a sucker for cool sprite work. I gotta throw up a picture of Buried Alive again. I love it so much. Now for the third creepypasta, this one takes a bit of a different structure than the first two stories had, as it's written in the form of a song called Hypno's Lullaby. The lyrics go, "Come little children, come with me, safe and happy you will be. Away from your homes now let us run, with Hypno you'll have so much fun. Oh little children, please don't cry, Hypno wouldn't hurt a fly. Be free, be free, be free to play, come down in my cave with me to stay. Oh little children, please don't squirm, those ropes I know will hold you firm. Hypno tells you this is true, but sadly, Hypno lied to you. Oh little children, you mustn't leave. Your families for you will grieve, their minds will unravel at the seams, allowing me to haunt their dreams. But surely all of you must know that it is time for you to go. Oh little children, you weren't clever, now you shall stay with me forever." This story is really the only one that I felt pretty uneasy about. It feels really lore accurate too, with the fact of using certain aspects of each of the Pokedex entries, such as in the Fire Red entry when it mentions that it took away a child that it hypnotized, or another entry that says when it's very hungry it puts humans to sleep, then it feasts on their dreams. And it's terrifying because Hypno, seen as something as more of a mindless animal in terms of the games, is so conscious that it can not only speak, but can orchestrate a way to make the dreams it will feed on a specific flavor to itself. God, I don't like this type of horror. It freaks me out. I couldn't handle it when that one movie came out, Megan is Missing, that like found footage. Oh my god. It keeps me up at night. Honestly, if you're a kid in the Pokemon world, this could possibly be one of those little scary things like 1-2 phrase coming for you. It's their version, basically. Anyway, on to number 4. We've looked at cursed games and scary Pokemon themselves, but what about the scariest location in Gen 1? This creepypasta is more of a scary urban legend, but it is such a big inspiration to PokePastas that it feels like I should include it in this list. This is Lavender Town Syndrome. The legend goes, the Lavender Town Syndrome, also known as the Lavender Town Tone, or Lavender Town Suicides, was a peak in suicides and illnesses of children between the ages of 7 and 12 in Japan back in February 27, 1996. The phenomenon occurred shortly after the release of the first Pokemon games, Pokemon Red and Pokemon Green. Rumors say that these suicides and illnesses only occurred after children playing the game reached Lavender Town. The location's theme had extremely high frequencies that studies have shown only children and young teens can hear because their ears are more sensitive. Due to this effect, at least 200 children supposedly committed suicide, and many more developed conditions and afflictions. The children who killed themselves usually did so by hanging or jumping from heights. Those who did not often acted irrationally and complained of severe headaches after listening to the theme. This mass hysteria was caused by the first released version of the game. After the incidents, the programmers fixed the location's music to be a lower frequency. Lavender Town now sounds differently depending on which Pokemon you're playing, but since that change, children are no longer affected by the song. One video appeared in 2010 using special software to analyze the audio waves of Lavender Town's music. When played, the software created images of the unknown near the end of the audio. This created controversy since the unknown don't appear in the series until Generation 2. The arrangement of the unknown appeared to translate to Leave Now. Now this story was a big influence on stories as every other Pokepasta used Lavender Town or made it part of the plot. It's also being clear that this is a rework of the incident with Porygon, known as Deno Senshi Porygon, or Electric Soldier Porygon. It was the 38th episode of the Pokemon's anime's first season, during its sole broadcast in Japan on December 16th, 1997. A scene comes up where Porygon is attacked with a laser, causing flashing lights, inducing photosensitive epileptic seizures in children across the country. Over 600 children were taken to hospitals, and the incident was referred to in Japan as the Pokemon Shock. There are clear parallels between the story and this incident, literally being less than a year apart, and light and sound both having effects on the psyche. The story always had my interest because I was wondering how real it could be. Like, I know there's that album of music that shows you what schizophrenia is like, but could this syndrome have actually had a chance of happening? Either way, it became a huge staple of Pokemon horror that gave Lavender Town the worst reputation and the biggest usage rate in all of these stories. Now we're gonna head on to number 5. Now, with talking about tropes and how these stories either popularized or started these tropes, I wanted to look at number 5 and really pick out the pinnacle of these tropes. And I gotta say, this one is pretty close to being every single trope that we've talked about and being the pinnacle of each and every one. For the last story of the video, we have Snow on Mount Silver. So because of how long the story is and how bad it's gonna mess up my throat trying to read it all at once, I'm gonna summarize the first part where the author explains why they're playing the game and how they got to this point. And then from there, I'll finish off by reading the rest of the full story. So the author and her brother were super into Pokemon, saying basically they played the entire generations up until Gold and Silver. Her brother picked up a Game Shark, which is a little device that's used to cheat the Pokemon games. I'll put one up here. It breaks one of his games, he puts it down and never uses it again. Later on, eventually they find the old games and he picks it back up and uses it on his Pokemon Silver game. She's away from the house for a day, comes back, the brother is in hysterics, destroyed all his old games, he becomes manic and is taken away to a hospital. While he's there, he asks the author to destroy all his old games. But the author becomes curious and wants to look at the Silver game, so instead she takes her version of Gold out and puts in his version of Silver. Alright, now that we got the exposition, comes the real story. It started up normally. I left the sound on low, too afraid of what I might hear to keep it the full way up, and too curious to turn off the whole way. The title screen was normal too. Lugia, again, but somehow menacing despite my common sense telling me it was exactly the same pictures every other time I had started up the game. How bad could this be, I asked myself. His note said Easter egg. Didn't that mean that was the coding already in the game? The menu came up, still absolutely normal. His character was Blake, with a mostly filled Pokedex, but the time was odd. 999.99. I knew he couldn't have been playing that long. I had barely logged 50 hours in my own game, and I was at the Elite Four. Probably the result of the hacking fucking up his file, I thought. Well, whatever then. The game started up, and the first thing I noticed was the prolonged black screen. It took almost a minute for anything to change, and there was no sound at all. The hairs on the back of my neck were standing up already, but it was too late to turn back. Finally, a very dim sort of map came onto the screen, but it looked like static. What was going on? I squinted down and realized with a fearsome pang that was actually the Mount Silver map, but what I thought was static was heavy falling snow, so this is where he had last saved his game. I checked his party, a very normal team for someone who had been using a Game Shark. Typhlosion, Feraligatr, Meganium, Pidgeot, Tyranitar, and Lugia, all level 100 with modded moves. Typical for him. Something about the sprites was strange though. They all seemed sullen in a way. Their colors seemed washed out and their expressions lacked the usual vigor that they had normally had. I chalked this up to missing pixels or something, also due to the hacking. The map had brightened up just a smidgen when I closed out of the start menu. Indeed, snow was somehow falling very heavily. Pixels danced across the screen so fast it was hard to see the little sprite that was my brother's character. Something was off about him too though. When I checked the information, it was the same as the Pokemon sprites. The colors were dulled. In fact, now I thought about it, he almost looked frostbitten. My stomach tightened, and I turned and tried to move back down the mountain. As I hit the bottom of the screen, words popped up, finally a sound, my sprite hitting an invisible wall. I can't turn back now. That was unsettling. I went into my Pokemon and tried to use Pidgeot's fly ability. I can't fly in this, obviously referring to the snow. Fuck this, I thought. Going into his bag, there was an escape rope. I tried using it. I can't go back anymore. What was going on? Once again, I tried to walk back down the mountain, and to my horror, the words changed with every attempt. I can't run away. I can't go back down. I can never go back. This last one sent a frigid feeling through my heart. There was no way down the mountain. I had to climb. Turning the little sprite around, I moved him forward. No resistance at all, though my walking speed was oddly slow. What was truly weird was the lack of grass, of trainers, of anything at all, but that white snow, which blew across the screen and made it almost impossible to see. As I moved further up the mountain, his walking speed became slower and slower. The static curtain of pixels grew thicker, so I could barely make out the features of the map, but it seemed like the only way to move was straight ahead anyway. I reached what looks like a set of stairs at the very top edge of the screen. I didn't remember this being here before. As I tried to move up, the little sprite paused. I'm cold. By now, even I was getting goosebumps. His walking speed had become painfully slow, as if somehow he was being impeded up the little staircase. More text was on the screen. Meganium has died. What the fuck? I thought. Pokemon don't die in these games. I checked in my party and was frightened and confused by what I saw. Meganium's sprite had been replaced by a big red X. All my other Pokemon sported varying degrees of damage, though I hadn't battled once. I went into my bag and found a single revive and tried to use it. It's too late, it said. What kind of Easter egg was this? There wasn't much else I could do. Trying to turn around yielded the same message as before, so I kept moving. Pidgeot has died. I checked again. Sure enough, there was a little red X on. This time I selected it and looked at the Pokemon itself, trying to figure out what was wrong. I wish I hadn't. The sprite was mangled, pieces of it were missing. What was left was splotched with a little sickish blue-gray color, and its eye was a solid black pit. I flipped down to Meganium, same deal. A leg missing, a chunk of its neck, most of its head, save that pitch-black dead eye. Morbid curiosity urged me forward, and the path never deviated from the straight upward road I'd traveled the entire time. Along the way, every now and then, another Pokemon in the party would die. An examination of its sprite would show it was the same condition as the others, until all that was left was Typhlosion. One more staircase was up ahead. I climbed it, and braced for whatever horror awaited me. I hit the summit. It was deserted. Red was nowhere to be found. The snow had stopped falling. In the very center of the map was something sticking out of the snow. It looked like a Pokeball. Okay, maybe all this creepy shit led up to some climactic final battle using whatever was in there. If I picked it up, maybe Red would come out of hiding. I walked over and examined it, and there was a burst of static noise from my game that made me jump. What appeared on screen was a battle animation. My trainer's sprite appearing, his skin tinged blue against the other mangled Pokemon sprites. It was Celebi. In the center of that black hole that was its eye, a single red dot burned like an ember. The thing looked rotted. I didn't even throw out my mostly dead Typhlosion before it had moved. Celebi used Perish Song. A screech came out of the Game Boy. I almost dropped it as the screen went white. A part of me was relieved thinking that my final Pokemon had been KO'd and I would be transported to a Pokemon Center. But I was wrong. My sprite reappeared in what looked like a cave. Was I now inside the mountain? I checked my trainer card and felt sick. The sprite was just as mauled as the Pokemon had been. A leg gone, a single eye remaining, pitch black, and so sad looking. Tears welled up at the corner. And every color on him was replaced by those 6 shades of frosty blue and gray. Every stat on the card was reduced to 0, except the time, which still read 999.99. I quickly moved back to the map. His sprite there mimicked the horror it had become on the Pokemon trainer card. Pieces were missing. Everything was discolored. I started trying to walk, and the first message I received was, "It's so cold." There was only one direction to go, upward. I moved on, and every now and then I would be stopped by a message that made my heart sink lower and lower. "Mother, it feels so cold. I can't go on." The walls as I walked became darker and darker, until they were pitch black at the end. There was an exit there, marked by a white outline. I had no other choice but to go through it. It opened to a chamber that was also solid white. The only way to distinguish the walls was a thin gray line that marked them as separate from the floor. Against the far wall there was another sprite. Red sprite. Intact. I had come this far. I had to finish this. I walked right up to him and hit A. ... A battle started. Red sprite had none of the deformities that marred my own. The colors were the same blue and grays, but he was intact. He just looked extremely sad. His first Pokemon came out. Venusaur. It was just like my own had been, but level 0, with a speck of health. I sent out Typhlosion, who had just 6 HP left. No Pokemon made a sound when they were brought into the battle. Venusaur used Struggle. There was no animation, just a single point of damage done to Typhlosion. and then the opposing sprite dropped off screen. Venusaur has died. There was no text asking me to switch out. Instead, there was just what looked to be dialogue from Red. ... His next Pokemon was Blastoise, even more mangled than Venusaur had been. It too struggled and died. After each round, there was an ominous ... from their trainer. Every sprite was more damaged than the last. His Espeon was barely distinguishable as a Pokemon. I realized somewhere he was sending them all out of order, which saved one Pokemon for last. Pikachu came out, and it was grotesque. It too was discolored like it was frostbitten. It was missing an ear, half of its body, and its tail. Its head was mostly intact, but its eyes were much larger than they should have been, and glared out at me like pitch black windows into hell. But the thing that got me the most was the giant smile that extended almost all the way to the edges of its head. Its health was somehow at 0, or at least looked that way. My hands were shaking. I didn't get a chance to attack. Pikachu used Pain Split. Then, Pikachu has died. Typhlosion has died. It cut back to the image of Red Sprite, and now it looked like mine. With his body so butchered, it looked like a carcass stripped of most of its meat, except it had that same soulless, deranged eyes that Pikachu did. I finally understood what happened. They were dead. They were dead, and this sublevel of the mountain was the hell they now exist in. Red finally spoke. It's over. The screen flashed black and white for a moment. Then, used Destiny Bond. A horrible, hideous screech started to issue from my Game Boy. The screen went white and it shrieked at me, and I threw it to the floor and pressed my back against the bed. The horrible noise continued for several long moments while the screen stayed white. Then it went black. Then there was silence. It took me a long few moments, but eventually I stood up, took the game chart, I took the notebook, and I took that fucking possessed game. I picked them all up and carried them to the garbage can that we had set out for this morning's pickup at the end of our long, winding driveway, and I threw them in. When I got back to the house, I don't know what made me do it, but I picked up the yellow version and inserted it into my Game Boy. I think it was part of me determined to make sure I hadn't somehow been tainted as well. The music started up, the game played, and I turned to my Pikachu and hit A. Its smiling face greeted me with an ear twitch and a big, pixelated smile. A pleasant, normal smile. I turned my game off. I spent the next hour crying on the floor. My brother and I never did play Pokemon together again. He gave it up for good. I stuck to replaying my comforting, unhacked games. That winter, the snow fell thick. That was a good one. I like it a lot. I like that it's a culmination of all the tropes that I kind of mentioned at first. It's really fun. I love the idea that it uses the Game Shark, which is like super popular at one point in time. I had one and I used it for all of Pokemon Platinum. Plus, I love the sprite work again. It's really cool. I like that they redesigned even Red's team and didn't just leave it completely, black and blue. They took off chunks. They made it look more like they had actually died. Sure, I was a little cringed out by the little end where it had Pikachu with a big smile, as that just felt like a really common trope back in the day, but it was still pretty good. I liked it. I also like that Mount Silver was used as the location for the horror, as Mount Silver is pretty creepy, and I like the idea of the snow becoming so unbearable that the character literally freezes to death and dies. But yeah, honestly, I just love all these old creepypastas. It was really fun looking back at them and kind of getting an idea of what I used to obsess over when I was in my creepypasta era. But hey, did you guys enjoy this type of video? I hope so, because this is actually one of the funnest ones I've made. I really like covering Pokemon horror and just more in-depth parts of the lore. I actually have another video idea where I go through and try to go through the lore of every legendary and try to figure out where they came from. We'll see how everybody likes this and we'll go from there. Either way, my name is RZ. I hope you loved the video. Remember to like and subscribe, and have a beautiful day.